So your toilet keeps running, you've already tried messing with the flapper, you've adjusted the float, and the thing still won't quit. Sound familiar? Well, 9 times out of 10, the real problem is a worn-out fill valve. And the good news is, replacing one is way easier than most people think. I'm going to walk you through the entire process step by step, from shutting off the water all the way through dialing in your water level perfectly. We're talking 10 minutes, maybe 15 if you take your time. And if you stick around to the end, I've got a bonus tip that'll help you avoid one of the most common mistakes people make after this repair, one that can lead to a whole new set of problems down the road. Let's get into it. Replacing a fill valve is honestly one of the best beginner plumbing repairs you can learn. It fixes the majority of running toilet issues in one shot. The parts cost you maybe $8 to $12, and once you've done it once, you'll be able to knock it out in your sleep. So let's start with a quick rundown of what's actually going on inside your tank, and then we'll get our hands dirty. Before we pull anything apart, it helps to understand what the fill valve actually does. When you flush your toilet, the flapper lifts, water rushes out of the tank and into the bowl, and the tank empties. The fill valve is the tall piece on the left side of the tank, and its whole job is to refill that tank with fresh water after every flush. It's connected to your water supply line underneath the toilet, and it has a float mechanism that tells it when to stop filling. When that valve starts to fail, it either runs nonstop, cycles on and off by itself, which people call ghost flushing, or it just can't maintain the right water level. That's when you know it's time to swap it out. The good news is you don't need a plumber for this. All right, let's talk tools. You're going to need an adjustable wrench or a pair of channel lock pliers, a small bucket, or some old towels, and that's honestly about it for the removal. For the install, everything you need comes right in the box with your new fill valve. I recommend picking up a universal fill valve. Fluidmaster 400A is probably the most common one out there, and it fits the vast majority of toilets. Cost you somewhere around $8 to $12 at any hardware store. Grab that and let's get started. Step 1 is shutting off the water and draining the tank. This is the part people sometimes skip because they're in a hurry, and trust me, that never ends well. Look behind or beside your toilet near the floor, and you'll see a small shutoff valve. It's usually an oval-shaped handle. Turn it clockwise until it stops. If you've got a quarter-turn ball valve with a lever handle, just turn it so the handle is perpendicular to the pipe. Now flush the toilet and hold the handle down to drain as much water as possible out of the tank. You're not going to get every last drop, and that's fine. Grab your bucket and a couple towels and set them underneath the tank where the supply line connects. There's always going to be a little bit of residual water, so just be ready for it. Quick tip here. If your shutoff valve is old and crusty and won't turn, don't force it. You can strip those out or even snap the valve, and now you've got a much bigger problem on your hands. If it won't budge, try a little penetrating oil. Give it 5 minutes and try again with gentle pressure. If it still won't move, you might need to shut off the main water supply to the house and replace that shutoff valve too. But for most of you, it'll turn just fine. Now that the water's off and the tank is mostly drained, let's disconnect the water supply line. Get down there with your adjustable wrench or your channel locks and look at where the supply line connects to the bottom of the fill valve. You'll see a coupling nut, and it's usually plastic or sometimes a braided stainless steel connector with a metal nut. Put your bucket right underneath this connection because water's going to come out. Loosen that coupling nut by turning it counterclockwise. Once it's loose enough, finish it off by hand and let the water drain into your bucket. Now here's something I want to mention. Take a look at that supply line while you've got it disconnected. If it's one of those old rigid chrome supply lines or plain rubber hose, do yourself a favor and replace it with a braided stainless steel supply line while you're at it. They cost about $5 to $7, They're way more flexible to work with, and they're much less likely to fail on you down the road. A burst supply line is one of the most common causes of water damage in a home, so this is cheap insurance. If your existing line is already braided stainless and it's in good shape, you can absolutely reuse it. Hey, if this is helping you out so far, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. All right, let's keep going. Now we're going to remove the old fill valve. This is the part that feels like the big moment, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Look underneath the tank on the outside, right where the fill valve comes through the bottom. You'll see a large mounting nut, usually plastic. This is what holds the entire fill valve assembly in place. Before you loosen it, reach inside the tank and grip the fill valve body with one hand to keep it from spinning. With your other hand, use your channel locks or your adjustable wrench to turn that mounting nut counterclockwise. Lefty-loosey. Once it's loose, spin it off by hand. Now you can lift the entire old fill valve straight up and out of the tank. Set it aside. While you've got the tank open and empty, take a second to wipe down the inside, especially around the hole at the bottom where the fill valve sits. You want a clean, smooth surface for the new rubber gasket to seal against. If there's any mineral buildup or gunk around that opening, clean it off. A rag and a little vinegar works great for that. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a brand new fill valve leak just because someone didn't bother to clean the old gasket residue off. Takes 30 seconds and saves you a headache. Next up, we need to set the height on the new fill valve before we install it. This is a step a lot of people rush through, and it makes a big difference. Pull your new fill valve out of the box and you'll notice the shaft is adjustable. It telescopes up and down. What you want is the top of the fill valve, specifically where the cap sits, to be about 1 inch above the top of the overflow tube inside your tank. That overflow tube is the open pipe in the center of the tank, usually attached to your flush valve. Here's how to measure it. Hold the new fill valve next to the overflow tube inside the tank, or even just eyeball it by holding it up to the outside. Most fill valves have markings on the shaft, or a twist lock mechanism, that lets you extend or shorten the height. On the Fluidmaster 400A, you grip the base and twist the shaft to unlock it, slide it to the height you need, and twist it back to lock. Get that top cap sitting about 1 inch above the overflow tube and lock it in place. Why does this matter? If the fill valve is too short, the refill tube won't reach the overflow pipe properly, and your bowl won't fill correctly between flushes. If it's too tall, it can interfere with the tank lid or not function efficiently. 1 inch above the overflow tube is your sweet spot. All right, now let's install the new fill valve. First, check the bottom of the valve. You'll see a rubber cone-shaped gasket, sometimes called a shank washer. Make sure it's seated properly on the threaded shank at the bottom. That gasket is what creates the watertight seal between the fill valve and the tank. Slide the fill valve down through the hole in the bottom of the tank. Make sure the valve is positioned so the water outlet, that's where the refill tube connects, faces toward the overflow tube. You want it oriented correctly before you tighten anything down. Now reach underneath the tank and thread on the mounting nut. Hand tighten it first, turning clockwise. Get it as snug as you can by hand. Then give it about another half turn with your channel locks. And I want to stress this part. Do not over-tighten this nut. The tank is porcelain, and if you crank down too hard, you can crack it. And if you crack your tank, you're not replacing a $12 fill valve anymore. You're buying a whole new toilet. Hand tight plus a half turn is all you need. The rubber gasket does the sealing work, not brute force. I've seen guys really wrench down on these and end up with a cracked tank, and that's a bad day for everybody. So easy does it. Now we're going to reconnect the water supply line. Take your supply line, whether it's the old one or a new braided stainless steel one, and thread the coupling nut onto the fill valve shank underneath the tank. Again, hand tighten first, then snug it up with your wrench. Same rule applies here. You don't need to gorilla grip this thing. A quarter turn past hand tight is plenty. If you're using a new braided stainless supply line, make sure the rubber washers are inside the coupling nuts on both ends. One end connects to the fill valve, the other connects to your shutoff valve. Those little rubber washers are what keep it from dripping, so make sure they're in there before you tighten anything. Once everything is connected, slowly turn your shutoff valve back on. And I mean slowly. Don't just crank it wide open. Turn it on gradually and immediately look underneath the tank at both connections, the supply line to the fill valve and the supply line to the shutoff valve. Watch for any drips. If you see a drip, don't panic. Just turn the water back off and snug up whichever connection is leaking by another quarter turn. Then try again. 9 times. Out of 10, a small drip just means you needed a tiny bit more on the nut. Let the tank fill up completely. You'll hear the fill valve running, and then it should shut off on its own once the float reaches the set level. Now here's where we fine-tune everything. Once the tank is filled and the valve has shut off, check your water level. You want the water sitting about 1/2 inch to 1 inch below the top of the overflow tube. Most fill valves have a water level adjustment built right into them. On the Fluid Master style, there's a small adjustment screw on the top of the fill valve right next to the float. Turn it clockwise to lower the water level, counterclockwise to raise it. Make small adjustments, like a quarter turn at a time. Then flush and let the tank refill to see where the water settles. It might take you 2 or 3 flushes to dial it in perfectly, and that's completely normal. Don't rush this part. Getting the water level right is what prevents the toilet from running in the first place. If the water's too high, it spills into the overflow tube and you're right back where you started. Too low, and you won't get a strong flush. That 1/2 inch to 1 inch below the overflow tube is exactly where you want to be. Now let's talk about the refill tube. This is the small flexible tube that comes with your new fill valve, and a lot of people either skip it or install it wrong. The refill tube clips onto the top of the fill valve at the water outlet, and the other end needs to go into the overflow tube. Most kits come with a small angle adapter or clip that hooks over the top of the overflow pipe. Attach the clip to the top of the overflow tube and then connect the refill tube to it. Here's the important part. The end of the refill tube should sit above the water line, inside the overflow tube. It should not be shoved down into the overflow pipe. If you push it too far down, it can create a siphon effect, and that will cause the tank to drain slowly and the fill valve to keep cycling on and off. Just clip it to the top so it drips down into the overflow tube, and you're good. This little tube is what refills the toilet bowl after each flush, so if you skip it, your bowl water level will be low, and your next flush won't have enough water to clear everything properly. Takes 10 seconds to install, and it makes a real difference. Give your toilet 2 or 3 test flushes now. Watch the whole cycle. The flapper should lift. The water should drain from the tank into the bowl. The flapper should drop back down and seal, and the fill valve should kick on and refill the tank. Once the water reaches the right level, the fill valve should shut off completely. No trickling, no hissing, no water running into the overflow. If everything looks good and sounds quiet, put your tank lid back on and you're done. That's it. Whole job. 10 minutes, $12, and you just saved yourself a service call. Let's go over some common issues you might run into after the install, because even when you do everything right, sometimes things need a little troubleshooting. First one is a slow drip from underneath the tank where the fill valve connects. If you see water dripping from the mounting nut area, turn off the water and remove the fill valve. Check that cone-shaped rubber gasket on the bottom of the shank. Make sure it's seated flat and isn't pinched, twisted, or cracked. Sometimes during installation it shifts a little, and that's enough to cause a drip. Reseat it, reinstall the valve, and tighten the nut hand tight plus that half turn. That usually does it. Second issue is the fill valve won't shut off and water keeps running into the overflow tube. This usually means your water level is set too high. Adjust that screw on top of the valve clockwise to bring the float down. Make small adjustments and flush between each one until the water stops below the overflow. If adjusting the float doesn't fix it, you might have debris stuck in the valve from your pipes. Turn off the water, pop the cap off the top of the fill valve, cup your hand over it, and turn the water on for about 3 seconds. The pressure will flush out any debris. Turn the water back off. Put the cap back on and test again. Third issue is a hissing sound coming from the fill valve after the tank is full. This almost always means the float isn't rising high enough to fully close the valve, or there's a tiny piece of sediment caught in the seal. Try the same flushing trick I just mentioned. Pop the cap, cup your hand over the top, turn on the water for a few seconds, and that burst of pressure usually clears whatever is in there. If the hissing continues, double-check that your float is moving freely and isn't rubbing against the tank wall or the overflow tube. Fourth one is the toilet bowl water level being too low after flushing. This goes back to that refill tube. If the bowl isn't filling up enough between flushes, either the refill tube isn't connected, it fell off the overflow pipe, or it's not flowing properly. Check the connection at both ends and make sure water is actually flowing through it during the fill cycle. If the tube is kinked, straighten it out and reclip it. Fifth issue, and this one catches people off guard, is the toilet running intermittently, cycling on for a few seconds every so often, even when nobody has flushed. If you just replace the fill valve and this is happening, the problem's probably your flapper, not the fill valve. A worn or warped flapper lets water slowly seep from the tank into the bowl, and once the water drops enough, the fill valve kicks on to top it off. So if you're getting that ghost flush after a new fill valve install, swap the flapper too. They're about $5 and take 60 seconds to change. Pull the old one off the pegs on the overflow tube. Snap the new one on. Hook up the chain, and you're set. Follow the steps we covered, and you should be in great shape. But if something doesn't seem right, don't hesitate to go back and double-check each connection and adjustment. Most issues come down to something small that's easy to fix once you spot it. All right, here's that bonus tip I promised you at the beginning. If you're replacing a fill valve in a toilet that's more than 10 or 15 years old, go ahead and replace the flapper and the supply line at the same time. I know it sounds like I'm telling you to do extra work, but hear me out. You've already got the water off, the tank is drained, and you're right there. A flapper costs about $5. A braided stainless steel supply line is another $5 to $7, so for less than $25 total, you've basically renewed the entire working guts of your toilet. The reason I recommend this is because these parts all age at roughly the same rate. If your fill valve failed, your flapper is probably getting close too, and that old supply line has been under constant pressure for just as long. I do this on every job. It takes maybe an extra 5 minutes, and it means you won't be back under that tank in 3 months because the flapper started leaking, or 6 months from now because the supply line gave out. Think of it like changing your oil and your oil filter at the same time. You're already in there, so just knock it all out at once. Your future self will thank you. That's the full breakdown on replacing a toilet fill valve. If this helped you out, hit subscribe and tap that bell so you don't miss the next one. Got questions or want to share how your repair went? Drop a comment below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.